If you're breathing through your mouth when you're sleeping, what can happen is because you're through the neurology of sleep, your central nervous system innervates your muscles, and your tongue is a major muscle. And so when you're in REM sleep in particular, your tongue can become temporarily paralyzed. It sounds a little weird, but if you're breathing through your mouth and you're laying back, you can envision if your tongue is not getting any sort of tonic nervous system input, it can collapse your airway. And this is very common, way more common than people realize. Like sleep disorder breathing is a spectrum. You have normal, nasal breathing. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have sleep apnea. Most of us are kind of in the middle where we have these periodic apneic events. One clue of people who have this is they wake up in the middle of the night to go pee. Because when you're having this sort of choking yourself on your own tongue, which is crazy, a lot of people do this, it affects vasopressin and the retention of water. Wow. It can cause you to go pee.
Welcome to the Pretty Intense podcast. Today is going to be an education in health and wellness when it comes to working out, supplements, food, fasting, exercise, blood sugar, insulin, all those things. And it is with Mike Mutzel. He has a degree in biology. He has a master's in clinical nutrition, and he's also an author with a couple of books. He is really just a wealth of information. So I mentioned some of those things that we talked about, and all we did was go into depth about them. And so it's fascinating to hear from, a scientific perspective, how the body reacts to stress, reacts to fasting, reacts to regular routines and not shaking things up. And then we hit you with a good one at the end with how to lose weight really fast. So I hope that you enjoy this episode. It's one of those note-taking kind of episodes, but be sure to check him out. Mike has tons of information. He's making videos all the time. He has a great YouTube channel. Also, click the subscribe and hit the thumbs up if you like this. Enjoy this episode. I recognize the shot from all of your videos.
Yep. This is where it goes down.
Yeah. Is it an office or is it like, have you just taken up the living room or something?
Yeah, it's an office. Yeah. But my daughter's room is just right next door. So when friends are over, it's kind of chaotic, but we do what we can, right? With the home office.
Oh, totally. Where are you anyway?
Yeah. Seattle area.
Oh, cool.
Kirkland, Washington specifically.
Well, how do you deal with the lack of sunlight then?
It's tough. You have to be very intentional about it, right? So I built a sauna. So we're doing the sauna and try to travel. My mom's in the Bay Area, so I'll go down to California or take an LA trip or something like that. But you have to be very intentional about it.
Yeah. So I'm curious what your day's been like so far. Like, what have you done? Tell me all of your things that you do.
Yeah, great question. So for me, like morning sunlight is really important. So first thing in the morning, before I even get on my phone and check, things out, whether it's internet accounts, stocks, all that sort of stuff, just get outside, get some movement. So I do some breath work and I faced east and really just try to get, sun in my eyes and get the dogs out for a walk. Then I come back and do a little meditation, 10 to 15 minutes after I've done the breath work. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've dabbled into meditation at all, but the whole mindfulness meditation community doesn't really acknowledge the importance of breath work and that hyperventilation followed by retention, sort of this box breathing where you inhale and then you pause and then you exhale, you hold and then repeat. That can be really helpful to get
What is your exact breathing that you do?
Well, so my first set of breaths, this is more like I learned this from this book about a decade ago, but this is more of just a quick to expand the rib cage. So it's can kind of for people watching. So it's really sort of more aggressive, but you inhale really aggressive and like that. And you're using your arms to sort of move your rib cage and diaphragm. Wow. So it just helps sort of expand.
You breathe going up and then you exhale the arms down.
Arms down and try to be sort of as intense as you can. And especially on the exhale, it's much easier for people to take a deep breath, but really when you exhale, focus on that lower part of that deep part of your lung and just like get it all out and then rapidly inhale again. So I'll do like 15 reps would be one set. Then I hold and then you can be a little lightheaded depending upon how intense you go. I'll do 2 sets of that. But that's just a great way to sort of prime the lungs, move the body, move your arms. And again, you're facing east, you're getting the sun in your eyes, which is great for your circadian clock system and all that.
Yeah. That's not it though. We're at least at this point in time, we're afternoon now. So there should be, what else?
There's more. Yeah. Sorry. Is this too slow of the detail? I don't want me to.
No, you're doing great. I'm actually asking for more.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's your morning.
So that's the morning, and then I'll have coffee after I do all that. So the idea is to sort of get sunlight, get some movement, get some air, calm the mind, focus with meditation. And then I'll do a little bit of work. I like to, with creative work, with reading. I was reading an article today from this PLOS ONE Journal of Biology talking about light exposure. And this expert consensus was saying, you know what, light should really be viewed as problematic as junk food, or as problematic as, say, environmental toxins, because our photoreceptors in our retina are transmitting all these external cues about daylight, about light exposure during the day, and also artificial light at night. And that's really augmenting this intricate circadian clock system that we have that affects hormones, that affects detoxification pathways, that impacts neurotransmitter synthesis. So, so many of us are focused on the foods that we eat, exercise, and all that is good, but we really should be as vigilant about minimizing exposure to artificial light in the 3 hours before bedtime, and being more intentional about, like as we film this, about 1 o'clock, great time to get outside and go for a walk. And a lot of us, I see you're in your home, I'm in my home. The intensity of the light in the home is just a fraction of what the sun is offering. And so as humans, we evolved to be out in that, whether it's farming or agriculture or hunting or just being outdoors. And we're not getting that. So many people, wonder why they can't fall asleep at night, and wonder why their hormones are off, or they're getting into menopause early, or all these things. And it's intimately linked to the circadian clock system. So yeah, that paper was just phenomenal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you touched on it just for a second. You said the word, which is something that I just love so much. And if there's anything bad about it, I'm just going to have to chalk it up. Like, I'm willing to do really about anything except for in this one specific area, to be more healthy, to have more longevity, to optimize my hormones, optimize energy. But when it comes to coffee, I got to have coffee. I went without coffee last year for about 2.5 months. I just stopped, and I had no problem. I didn't have a single headache from it. I wasn't less energetic. I just love coffee. And so tell me the good and the bad, and what is sort of like the optimal way to consume it. And I'm sure I'm going to have more questions about it, but let's just start there.
Yeah. I don't think coffee is as bad as some people present it to be. The coffee that I think it's really the timing of the coffee consumption. So for example, we're recording this at 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. I would definitely not advise you have coffee after this point in the day. Now, if you're going to go do a hard workout, if you're like, okay, oh my gosh, I haven't seen my girlfriends in like 3 months, we're going to go out tonight, find a little caffeine. But caffeine really is problematic for helping you fall asleep. It disturbs all of the adenosine metabolism in the brain. So it's going to augment sleep. And so that's not good. But I'm a fan, especially, we were talking before we started recording about maybe a wedding's coming up, losing a little weight. A lot of people have, these want to get in shape for summer. Using caffeine before you exercise has been shown to prevent the catabolism or the breakdown of muscle, which is a good thing, and enhance the oxidation of fat. So in the morning, I'm a big fan of that. And I do a double espresso. And when choosing the beans, I'm a bigger fan of an organic light roast. And there's a few different reasons for that, but that's what I preferentially choose. I periodically will have just say USP caffeine in the form of like a pre-workout, but I try to use that sparingly. That's sort of like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something extra intense today, or something's going on where I need a little, but I really advise people not be dependent upon pre-workouts and straight up caffeine, and use coffee as a little tool. But where people get into problems with coffee is they have the coffee, then they have the stevia packets, or they have Splenda, or they have a bunch of sugar, and it becomes basically a 400, 500, 600 calorie energy bomb, which that can add up. You add in 3 meals there, plus some wine, plus some beer, you're looking at 3,000 to 4,000 calories. And unless you're really active, you're probably going to gain some weight. So those are my thoughts on coffee.
Well, I drink it black, total purist. So you talked about the timing, and this is because I've read a lot and watched a lot of videos about coffee and timing and sunlight, and that your body has sort of the natural energy from waking up, and is that cortisol that produces that and kind of gives you a burst, and that you should wait at least an hour perhaps after you wake up to drink it. Me, I wake up, I force myself to drink a glass of water. And I actually put some aloe vera in it. And then cool. I put a little bit of lemon juice and some apple cider vinegar, just a little bit. And so I force myself, I drink that, or just regular water. But then I'm ready for coffee. And that might only be like 30, 40 minutes after I wake up, maybe.
I think that's fine. I know a lot of people do split hairs on having to wait this amount of time and this. Some days that's not practical. I mean, if you're going off to travel or you're doing something, but if it makes my thing is like, if it makes you feel good and it's, there's not a lot of downside. So you're like, okay, if you only wait 45 minutes, what's the worst that's going to happen? Your cortisol awakening in response, which is theoretically why people are saying delay the onset of coffee, should already be kicking in even before you wake up. That should be sort of awakening you. So I don't worry about that. There's other things that I worry about. I would, and if we're too regimented, this is another thing. If we exert too much willpower, I'm only going to consume this much coffee. I'm going to meditate. I got to exercise. I can't have sugar. I can't do this. Then by the time it's 10 o'clock, you're like, oh my gosh, forget it. I need that glass of wine, or I need some ice cream. So we need to be mindful about how much willpower and how much restraint we're sort of inserting into our day. And so I think, having low coffee, not a big deal if it's within a half an hour, 40 minutes of awakening.
Sure. This is a little bit of a side question to the coffee, but sort of in light of getting sunlight in the morning. I have a big, Joovv, like 6-panel red light. And I think I kind of know the answer, but I'm curious from a scientific standpoint. Sometimes I think to myself, oh man, especially right now in Arizona, it's like sunny at 5 a.m. It's getting sunny. And I know that because that's when I wake up, because I wake up with the light. And I think, well, should I do the red light? Because normally my routine would be to get up, have that water, a little bit of coffee, red light, stretch, a little bit of yoga during that, dry brush, cold shower, get some clothes on, go walk the dogs. That's kind of my normal routine. But I'm like, man, I probably should just skip the red light and just get outside. Like it's like, is that accurate, or is there some benefit with red light specifically? Is there more density of those wavelengths that it's giving you that helps with the mitochondria and other kinds of things that it's meant to improve, or should you just get outside?
It's a great question. I think this time of year, you should just get outside.
Yeah.
Especially for you, it's starting to get warmer and warmer, and then you may not be outside in the middle part of the day. So I think that's more important. There are definitely some mitochondrial benefits with regards to, and we too have the 6-panel Joovv, and it's an awesome setup, right? But I consider that more therapeutic in the wintertime specifically. You mentioned how in the heck do you survive in Seattle? Like that is because sometimes it doesn't get light out until 8:30, and that's really tough. So that's where I think the Joovv comes in, and also it can help with an injury. Let's say, for example, you're like, well, I have a bicep injury, or, was training, had some challenges. I know you recently got into an accident, right? There was a spinning situation going on. So maybe that could help with the recovery. Then you go outside. But I think if you're going to, I would definitely prefer the sun over the Joovv, as much as I love the Joovv.
I have a lot of questions about fasting, but first I want to start off with just being a fat burner versus a sugar burner. And I get that, once you become more metabolically flexible, you should be able to kind of tap into either. And then perhaps you're not as hungry as often because your body is adapted and it can shift sort of energy mechanisms. But how the hell do you know if you're burning fat or sugar? because I get hungry and I try and minimum of 12 hours. And then sometimes, a little bit more depending on the situation or the time of the month. But how do we know when we're burning fat versus sugar?
The really practical way to do this is actually to test, and you can get a glucometer. And I encourage all my clients to do this, is just go down to Walgreens or Rite Aid or your closest drugstore. People think, oh, a glucose meter, that's only for diabetics. No, this is for everyone. We need to know how our body is processing the foods that we eat. And we need to know how our lifestyle is impacting the post-meal processing. So you mentioned, like, even if you eat a low carb diet, for example, but most people in the post-meal window, their blood sugar is going to go up. So you're naturally going to sort of oxidize or burn more glucose in the post-meal window. But most Americans, unfortunately, stay in that state because not only are they eating foods that dramatically increase the glucose, but they're snacking every 2 to 3 hours or more. And so the glucose they're always sort of oxidizing or burning glucose and never get to the point to where maybe you or I would be in, because we exercise and because we compress that feeding window, AKA we fast, we get to the point where the glucose goes down and the body needs energy and it starts to dip into the fat stores. And we can talk about hormonally why that happens. But to specifically, again, address the question, how do you know? You would get a glucose meter, you would start to test your glucose, and you could do like 30 minutes after, it's just a little finger prick, 29 gauge. It stings a little bit, but it's no big deal. So you could test your glucose again 30 minutes after a meal, 60 minutes after the meal, and 90 minutes. And you should see that glucose starting to come down. And that would indicate that as glucose comes down, then you should start to oxidize fats for fuel in the post-meal window.
Oh, well, I wore a continuous blood glucose monitor last year for a few weeks. And I recommend it to anyone because it's such good information. Not only do you, you realize that little bit of snacking, it can be a bite or two of something and you're like, oh my gosh, I've just ruined my flatline, beautiful, no blood sugar spike situation I have going on. But also, of course, learning about what foods your body does well with blood sugar wise and which ones you don't. Like, for instance, just as an example, I do terrible with sweet potatoes and oats. They were like through the moon. But then I did fine with popcorn, like corn tortilla chips. I tried rice, not too bad. So anyway, it was very good information, but so it's that simple. So you're saying that as soon as the blood sugar comes down, that it's at its normal amount, which would be, 70 or something like that ish.
Yeah.
It's probably a little different for everybody, but that indicates that you're in a fat burning mode.
That you would be oxidizing more fats for fuel as a proportion, because you need to so the brain is either going to be oxidizing glucose or fats or ketones. And so when glucose is low, that's going to approximate or suggest that your body is basically in a metabolic state such that fat is being broken down and is being directly utilized in the form of free fatty acids, or your brain is utilizing ketones that are also formed as a consequence of fat oxidation. So another thing that you can look at is breath acetone. So there's a meter called the Biosense meter, and I like this because it's a way to sort of, your body off gases acetone when you're in a state of ketosis. And when you're in a state of ketosis, the sort of prerequisite for that is low glucose, low insulin. So again, insulin is a hormone that takes glucose out of the bloodstream and puts it into either your fat tissue or your muscle. So when those two situations are low, and then another hormone that is also released from the pancreas, i.e. like insulin as well, called glucagon. Glucagon actually helps burn fat as well. So low glucose, low insulin, high glucagon, the hormonal sort of signature that's going to help you burn fat. And anyway, when that is happening, your breath acetone starts to increase. So that's another way that people can, it's an at-home thing, very easy to do. I think it's $189 some odd. You blow into it and it will tell you where your levels are. So that's another tool. And that's where I think it's helpful. Like you mentioned, the continuous glucose monitor, phenomenal. And I have a few questions for you on that. But the breath acetone is cool because some people are like, well, I've heard that this guru says I should fast for 20 hours a day. No, I should fast for 12 hours. And then you can sort of bio-individualize, your own fasting protocol. Not everyone is going to benefit, or, if you're really physically active and you're training a lot, do you really need to fast for 22 hours out of a 24-hour day? No. Like, you're probably okay doing a 12 to 14-hour time-restricted feeding window. But if you're morbidly obese, you don't exercise, you've been living off processed, junk food, maybe a 1 meal a day for you or an 18-hour fast could accelerate your sort of metabolic healing processes. So again, that's where these tools can come in, and they're just one piece of the puzzle that can help us triangulate and better understand. But I think it's also helpful, not just, and my question for you, this is not just about nutrition, but also the lifestyle factor. So for me, Danica, I found when I wore the continuous glucose monitor, I hate waiting in lines, especially like TSA lines. And I was in a Canadian airport, and I'm normally TSA pre and fly clear. So I'm not used to like waiting 90 minutes in line, for the x-ray. And I was about to miss my flight, and my glucose went from 70 fasted up to 170. So I was wondering, you mentioned, sweet potatoes and things like that, and oats were problematic, but did you notice sleep or stress impacted your glucose?
Yep. At one point in time, I was having a heated conversation, and I looked at it and I was like, holy shit, my blood sugar spiked because I was heated. Also with exercise, that also spiked my blood sugar. So I'm kind of curious about that. I'm actually, what I want to get into is a little bit of sort of like the stresses of the body versus with all the kind of with fasting, with exercise and those kinds of things. But I totally noticed that the times where I was consuming no food at all, that I had stress, or I was working out and exercising with more intensity, would definitely spike my blood sugar.
Okay, so I think those situations are helpful to unpack for people because they assume high blood sugar bad. But we know with exercise, the hormones, the adrenaline, the noradrenaline that help us actually have a good workout and also help us burn fat, those increase glucose. And so we need to understand that if you were exercising, if you're running an ultra, you're running 100 miles in a day, every single day, that high glucose from exercise would be considered problematic. But because we're exercising for say 30 or 40 minutes a day, we're having a transient increase, and then it really drops down. Yeah. And part of that increase in glucose is because you're liberating stored glucose known as glycogen. And once you deplete that glycogen, that's a really powerful signal to actually start to oxidize and burn more fat in the post-exercise window. So for folks listening, don't be scared of exercise-induced increases in glucose. Okay. Not problematic, right? It's totally different from food-induced increases in glucose. Like having a Slurpee, having the glucose flux from a Slurpee is not the same as having glucose fluxes from exercise. So when we deplete that glycogen, when we burn through that blood sugar from our workout, our body thinks, oh my gosh, we have to reprioritize resynthesizing that muscle glycogen. So while we're doing that, we're actually going to pivot into a fat burning state. And this is why short duration, high intensity interval training, although it doesn't directly oxidize or burn fat during the workout session, in the post-exercise window, just a short duration, 20, 30 minutes of HIIT training increases fatty acid oxidation for up to 36 hours, depending upon how intense it is. In contrast, that same sort of duration of exercise doing continuous cardio, it burns significantly more fat during the actual exercise session, but that's it. There's not a lot of post-exercise fat oxidation. So really important that we're not scared of intense exercise because it does increase glucose. Now, that's the exercise element, but the stress aspect, really important, because you mentioned you had a heated conversation, glucose went up. Well, for some people, they're having those heated conversations or having that physiologic stress all the time. Maybe they're in customer service. Maybe they drive a taxi in New York City. Maybe they're in a terrible relationship or marriage. And so it's like going home is stressful, right? So there's this difference between acute stress from, say, exercise or what have you, and this chronic psychological stress that manifests physiologically. That is really problematic and not health promoting whatsoever, because when your glucose is doing this all day, that's going to trigger you to then reach for the candy bar or the ice cream or binge watch Netflix or whatever. And that's where, sort of the non-nutritional factors, i.e. stress, perceived stress and all that, can cause your diet to go awry. And so it's really important that we're aware of this. And again, that's why testing can be helpful.
Especially noticed it, of course, after you eat. If I just went for a walk for 10 minutes, it would totally blunt the blood sugar response. You don't have to do much. I could even just like do dishes and vacuum or something. Like I just have to get up and move and walk and take steps. And it was amazing how it would reduce it. But as far as exercise goes, walking would definitely like reduce blood sugar no matter what. It would stabilize it. There was so many positive things about walking and the fact that you can do as much of it as you want humanly, really. And I was very curious about that. So if we plug that into the morning now, and I'm going to kind of feed maybe some stressors in that I have questions about, but such as this morning, I was like, I'm going to go for a walk and then I'm going to come back. And it was actually because I had listened to something you said, you like do your walk and your little bit of movement in the morning and then lift in the afternoon. And so I was like, I'll just walk. And then I came back and had breakfast and I did a couple little things. And then I did a little just interval session of like 30 minutes of just 10 different moves over and over again. And that felt really good. I've always actually felt really good to eat before I work out. So is it better in the morning because I know there's also some science behind lifting and exercise before you eat, and it can perhaps boost your fat burning pathways to tap into that fat storage while you're still in a fasted state. So, and I know nothing is black and white, but from your perspective, what's the science behind all that, and what's the right thing to do?
Yeah, this is a great question. The research is a little mixed on this. Bodybuilders, if we look at what actual real people do, because the science is a little mixed. What physically fit people do when they're training for a competition to get as lean as possible, they generally do fasted cardio in the morning to accelerate fat loss. But the research is a little mixed on that. What I suggest—
when you say cardio, just be clear, like walking, running.
They're doing steady state. Yeah, the bodybuilding community is all about sort of steady state cardio, 45 minutes
of running or walking.
Usually walking on a treadmill or doing a stair stepper. There might be some incremental added fat loss from that. But I generally recommend, if people are honest with their own metabolic health, if they're morbidly obese or overweight, have a lot of weight to lose, the argument to do fasted exercise is more favorable. But someone like yourself, already physically fit, you're probably trying to just maintain the muscle you have, gain some strength. You don't need to lose 100 pounds. I think it's great to actually have a meal beforehand, just a small amount of food, because you will have a better workout. And so that's where, as long as you're putting that intensity in, I will having the incremental increase in fat oxidation, I think, is not worth the loss of intensity that you can have through that exercise if you are having a little bit of food beforehand. So that's what I suggest with that. The other thing too is if we dig too much of an energetic hole when we're working out, let's say we're fasted, then we crush a workout and we're like, yeah, we can have, and women are actually more susceptible to this than men, a post-exercise sort of binge. So if we say we burn 600 calories or 900 calories during that exercise session, maybe we do CrossFit, we do intervals, we have our friends there, we have caffeine, we're super pumped up. Afterwards, we can feel like we deserve more calories than we actually burned, and it can sort of work against us. So I think this is where the individual needs to come. If you're prone to overeating in general, then don't work out fasted, because it's probably going to cause you to overeat in the post-exercise window. And if you're already used to training and you know what you're doing and you have a routine, then have a little food beforehand. You're probably going to have a better workout. But if you're a novice, you're kind of going anyway, you're not really working out that intensely, totally fine doing that fasted, and then you could eat afterwards. So different options for different folks.
Okay. What about the effects of the stress of fasting, the stress of exercise on the body, in particular, perhaps the adrenal support in the body? I really grapple with that because in the past year, I've done a lot of testing, and I know that my cortisol was spiking in the middle of the night based on the Dutch test, which is a test where you pee on a piece of paper like 4 to 5 times a day. And since I go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I got the middle of the night one, which made it 5. And my cortisol was spiking then and actually tapering from there and never rising when I got up. And so it would indicate adrenal fatigue to some, maybe. And so I really wonder, for people who maybe have had a stressful life or been through stressful things, whether it's work or relationships or perhaps even just like a bunch of hard workouts or something like that. What's the sweet spot? And is it better to take care of yourself and go for the walk? Or is it still better to use the fat burning potential of exercising and fasting? Because that's the other thing, is just the amount of fasting is another stressor on the body. So where's the happy medium with all that?
I don't have the answer for everyone, but we do know, of course, that we need to have a realistic evaluation at our stress life load bucket, And so if we're doing super intense, short duration, high intensity interval, a lot of volume in particular, paired with under eating, paired with life load, problematic. And so I think I know we can dig ourselves into a hole. I've done it before. And so if we start to stand up too quickly, we get lightheaded, we get dizzy. Yeah. Those are signs and symptoms that you're starting to feel burnt out, right? You're waking up lethargic, all those things. But I will say, fasting, it does increase cortisol and noradrenaline, but so does eating food. Like so does waking up in the morning. So there are other things that increase that. So I think because, we know that fasting does increase these sort of what are called counter-regulatory hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. It doesn't mean that it's always bad. And in some contexts, fasting can actually increase heart rate variability, which is a sign of your sort of parasympathetic branch of your autonomic nervous system. So, there's a lot to this. And this is why, if we sort of just pause and take a small little sidestep to talk about the whole circadian clock system and circadian rhythms, anyone who has adrenal fatigue or a sort of blunted cortisol awakening response that you discover through the Dutch test, this is where we need to be extra mindful about artificial light exposure at night and how much daylight we're getting and being so intentional. Anyone with adrenal fatigue should be eating lunch outside, should be really on it with that morning walk. And literally, like in the 3 hours before bedtime, no electronics or very low intensity electronics, and not a lot of halogen or LED fluorescent lights in screens and so forth, because that is way worse for the adrenals and the circadian clock system than a little exercise. So
even television at night?
This is the thing. The TV is it's really the intensity and how close it is to you.
Your phone is here, right? But
so intense.
TV's out here. But it's also much bigger. So does it mean every technical device are you okay with the glasses? Like I have some, blue light glasses. Does that do it? Will that fix it? Or is it just really purely, especially if you're dealing with this fatigue, just got to read a book or something?
Yeah. Or do it earlier. Like maybe you watch your television earlier, then you can go for a walk or something. Within the 90 minutes before bed, I would say no TV, especially if you're dealing with adrenal issues and trying to correct things. Perimenopausal, postmenopausal women, really important because that change, that transition, the estrogen influences the circadian clock system. And so there's a loss of rhythmicity. So that's why you see women sort of waking up sometimes at 3 a.m. or what have you.
Just to go pee though, just to go to the bathroom. I go right back to sleep. Is that an indicator?
No. So, but when you get up to go to the bathroom, you would definitely want to use, it's in my bedroom, so I don't have it right here, but a little headlamp. So you're not turning on all the lights.
Sure. Yeah. I know I have basically my,
braille.
Yeah, exactly. And my sort of muscle memory for the steps is pretty good.
There you go. That's good. Yeah. So when you start turning on all the lights, then your brain is saying, in your eyes, the photoreceptors are like, oh yeah, we should get up now. And then people can't fall asleep.
Yeah. I actually can't sleep if I don't go to the bathroom. It took me a while to learn that, but if I was kind of restless, in the middle of the night when it was still dark, even if I didn't feel it strongly, I would sort of not be able to get back to sleep. And as soon as I just went to the bathroom, I would go right back to sleep. So it actually helps me go back to sleep.
That's good.
But I drink too much water, especially at night.
I know that's the problem, right? Drinking water earlier. So another small sidestep, because you brought it up, have you heard of mouth taping and nose breathing and mouth breathing?
I haven't read the book Breathe, but isn't that kind of sort of what they talk about? And there's actually specific mouth tape.
Yeah. So the mouth tape. So if you're breathing through your mouth when you're sleeping, what can happen is, because you're through the neurology of sleep, your central nervous system innervates your muscles, and your tongue is a major muscle. And so when you're in REM sleep in particular, your tongue can become temporarily paralyzed. It sounds a little weird, but if you're breathing through your mouth and you're laying back, you can envision if your tongue is not getting any sort of tonic nervous system input, it can collapse your airway. And this is very common, way more common than people realize. Like, sleep disorder breathing is a spectrum. You have normal, nasal breathing. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have sleep apnea. Most of us are kind of in the middle, where we have these periodic apneic events, and it's called sleep disorder breathing. So one clue of people who have this is they wake up in the middle of the night to go pee, because when you're having this sort of temporarily choking yourself on your own tongue, which is crazy. A lot of people do this. It affects vasopressin and the retention of water. And so it can cause you to go pee. So that's a symptom. I'm not saying
get the duct tape out.
The specific tape is called the company 3M, the 3M micropore tape. Okay. I encourage people to just experiment with this. It can be a game changer for sleep. And you mentioned the cortisol awakening response. Sure. So what I encourage my clients to do is, before putting it on before bed, you can maybe take it out in the evening, put some tape on when you're reading a book or doing something else, and get comfortable breathing through your nose and so on. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's how we should be breathing when we're sleeping, is through our nose, and the tape can just help facilitate that.
Got it. I'm friends with Gabby and Laird, cool. Laird Hamilton and Gabby Reese. And she would sometimes have us, because she would lead some workouts, and she would say, okay, go on the row 5,000, but breathe out of your nose only. And I was like, oh man, it's crazy how much different it is to breathe just through your nose, especially when you're doing activity. But that's a great tip for at night. What are some things that people can do? Because I wonder about this for myself. How do we know if we're in adrenal fatigue? How do we know if our cortisol is? Because I was here too. There's also the other side of it, where your cortisol is through the roof. And so what are your recommended tests to see if somebody's suspicious of where they're at biologically? Because we also all think, oh, we're fine. But even a heated conversation raises your blood sugar. So what do you recommend for people?
Yeah, well, the test that you recommended, the Dutch test, I do quite like that, because it does look at the sort of the rhythmicity of your hormones and the metabolites throughout the day. So you'll see the cortisol awakening response, the time. Then you also can look at DHEA, and that's something that we can take a deeper dive into. But so that's like an objective way to sort of quantify, hey, how are my adrenal glands doing? If people just want to ask themselves, sort of subjectively, the big things are, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? I.e., are you ready to go hit the day? Are you excited? Do you have energy? Or are you like, oh my gosh, I can barely get out of bed. I'm exhausted. I'm tanked. I'm lethargic. I'm like, have no energy to work out. I get dizzy when I stand up. Very sensitive to sunlight. That's another thing as well. And then also, if your rhythm's all sort of messed up, then some people can be sort of tired but wired when they should be ready to go to bed. So some people, their adrenals start to really kick in because of circadian clock disruption later in the day. And so your cortisol should be at its lowest point around bedtime. But for some people, it's starting to get high. And that's why they're like, dude, I have so much energy now. I'm going to binge watch Netflix and then fall asleep at 4 a.m. And it just creates this really not so good cycle. So, there's some sort of controversy in the whole health community. Really, what is adrenal fatigue? Is it just circadian rhythm disruption? Because again, you should have a strong cortisol awakening response, but so many people now are exposed to artificial light. We have the LEDs in compact fluorescence. We have televisions. We have screens. And so that's enough light to pivot the entire circadian clock system to trigger your adrenals to start making cortisol when it really should not be. So there's that element of it. But then there's also the life load aspect, the psychological stressors and all that. So what do we do about it? I'm a big fan of DHEA. So this is a hormone that a lot of people aren't really familiar with, but it's a mother hormone that feeds into estrogen and testosterone.
Yeah.
And the adrenal glands, we've all heard of andropause, and we see all these HRT clinics everywhere, hormone replacement therapy clinics, it's on the radio. And so we've heard of menopause, which is where women stop making, reproductive hormones and so forth. But we have adrenopause. Your adrenals naturally, in some people, can go through a state of can take a little hiatus. And so that one of the hormones that really can decline as you age is called DHEA. Yep. And you can test for this. Again, the Dutch test looks at it, but if you just get blood work from your primary care doctor or a functional medicine doctor, DHEA sulfate is what you'd look for. I'm seeing this, people that I work with in their 20s, it's very low. And so when DHEA is low, then their testosterone is going to be low. Then their estrogens are going to be low. And this can be very problematic. So, I honestly, I think it's a combination, the circadian rhythm disruptions, the psychological stressors and all that. But in your case, because, and I don't know how recent the Dutch test was, and I would want to look at your other hormones, but I might suggest considering taking like 5 milligrams or maybe 10 milligrams of DHEA around 8 p.m. at night. Do you take DHEA?
I do. Yeah. Cool. Part of the testing, my testosterone was low, DHEA low, estrogen, all my hormones were low. We can get into that, but it's not necessarily super important. But yeah, all my hormones were low. And so the DHEA was to, with the functional doctor I was working with at the time, was to help with boosting testosterone. So yeah, I mean, I take 10 now. I took 5 milligrams for a while. I take 10 milligrams right now.
Okay. And
I take it in the morning.
Well, so here's the thing. And maybe I'm guilty of recommending, I used to recommend DHEA in the morning, but it can be used, especially for people like yourself, who the pattern is a little off. It might help push, because DHEA can sort of antagonize cortisol a little bit.
Okay.
And again, there's not huge studies showing this, but it's just a small handful of studies. So it makes sense to try it.
10 of those though, and it makes a difference.
Yeah. So if you can, and if that cortisol is maybe waking you up or causing light sleep, that could be helpful. So try to take that 10 milligrams, like with your evening supplements, maybe an hour before bed.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah. I sleep. I don't know if you've come across anybody like this, but I wake up awake every day. Like I never wake up tired. I wake up super alert, ready to go. I don't even need coffee. I just love it. And I'm tired at night, and I'm hungry in the morning, and I'm not hungry at night. But I also don't need a lot of sleep. Like I have had patches of my life where I'm like, okay, I know like 5 hours is not really enough, but that's like all I'm sleeping right now. And I'm fine. I feel fine, but I know from a health perspective that this is detrimental. So is there any person in the world that can survive on 6? I mean, I get right now, cause I try and get as much sleep as possible. I mean, I rarely get 8, but 7's kind of the number for me. 6.5 is fine. 7.5 is great. Is there anyone that can get away with low sleep, or is sleep always necessary for the circadian rhythm and for your hormones to do what it needs to do through the night?
And honestly, I think it depends on who you ask. I would say have an honest evaluation of your energy and how you feel in the morning. And if you're waking up without an alarm, ready to go, 5 or 7 hours, right? Like, I think that's probably sufficient for you. But if you were like, oh yeah, I need a nap at 3 o'clock and I'm just exhausted, then you're probably not getting enough sleep. But Matthew Walker will tell you that, and he's got a PhD. He's really into the brain and preventing Alzheimer's and things like that, that not getting less than 7 hours is insufficient for clearing up some of the metabolic debris in your brain that naturally builds up throughout the day. And so you have this whole sort of cleansing, sort of like a dishwasher process going on in your gliolymphatic system in the brain. So if we're shortchanging sleep, then over time we can build up metabolites that might predispose us to early onset neurodegenerative disorders. So just be mindful of that. Now, that doesn't mean that if you have one night of just 5 hours that you're doomed. It just means, hey, maybe take a nap, you can bank your sleep as well. So if you know that you're going to be traveling, hanging out with friends you haven't seen in 2 years, and you're like, we're going to be partying it up. It's like, okay, well, maybe take an extra nap that day, or try to aim to get more sleep ahead of time. So you can sleep bank.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
That made me think of, so last year I ran the Boston Marathon. And so I had a Garmin for really just like to know how far I was going. I wasn't using it for too much more, but HRV was something that I was told to track. And just because the functional doctor at the time said it's sort of a foolproof way to know how your body's doing, because you can't cheat the heart rate. And I found that very interesting. And since so many people wear wearables, as soon as the marathon was over with, I took that thing off. Like I learned enough to know that when I drink a little, I get like half the recovery. And I know that if I don't, then I generally recover to sort of like, I don't know, 80, 90%, 100 sometimes. So I just kind of felt like I was doing fine. But I also in recent time have seen how people can, with heart rate variability track also illnesses coming on. Like it'll pick it up before you even feel it. And so like, I don't know, do you wear a wearable?
I do. Yeah. I have a Garmin. I wear the watch, and then I also wear the Oura Ring at night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you find conflicting information?
A little bit. Yeah. It doesn't totally jive. I just like the Garmin watch. I like to go out hiking in the backcountry. So I do like it's barometric pressure. There's all these other features to it. And then the steps are kind of nice, but the HR, I don't wear this when I'm sleeping. Because the Oura Ring, how they built it is it's a lower EMF device, so that when you're sleeping and all this, you don't have all these non-native frequencies right in your temple and all that. So yeah, the Oura Ring is good because that will give you an average. And you're right, like so many people will tell you, gosh, my HRV tanked. In fact, when I had COVID in December of 2020, I knew something was off. I didn't think it was COVID at the time because it was kind of quite mild, but my HRV totally tanked, and my heart rate started to increase. So that was a sign that, hey, something's sort of wrong here. Then I started to call friends that I was with, and turns out they all had it, right? So anyway, I think it's a great thing for people to be aware of, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, well let's get into fitness, because again, there's so much information out there that feels to me like it's very targeted and researched towards men. And I try really hard to find specific information to women. You do share some, especially because your wife is so fit and she, practices fasting windows and exercises and those things. So I do hear you talk about that, and I appreciate that. But it's not the norm to really know a lot about women's hormones and exercising and fasting. And so, I mean, I think we talked a little bit about fasting, but is there some things specific to women that we should pay attention to? And also getting more into sort of exercise. We're talking about, I used to do CrossFit all the time. I used to do 2-a-day workouts. I used to do all kinds of stuff. And so I wonder if part of that was some of the sort of like depletion of the body, but just, the difference between walking and lifting and high intensity exercise, interval training versus steady state, is there any difference with women that we should be doing that are different from men?
It's an awesome question. I do think that women should vary their intensity based upon where they are in their cycle and things like that. So, during the luteal phase, maybe change it up, decrease the intensity a little bit. And listen to the body and not try to push things too intensely. But the biggest mistake that I've seen working with women since 2006 is overexercise and undereating. So I think it's really important for women to not rely upon cardio as a primary mechanism to stay lean or burn fat, and instead, use cardio as sort of the appetizer, the last resort. So try to, find out your calorie maintenance, look at your lean body mass. You can work with a coach or someone like that to figure out how many calories does Sally Smith need in a day to preserve lean muscle mass. So reframing it, instead of, I got to burn fat, say, okay, how can I maintain this muscle mass? And as a sort of side benefit of that, I will lose the fat. I think that's sort of the biggest framework shift that a lot of women from just a set of heuristics should refocus on, because again, it's all this sort of diet culture. You got to cut your calories. You got to eat iceberg lettuce and carrots and celery for lunch. Like, no, you should be having red meat and steak and, prioritizing protein to preserve the lean mass. And then as a side benefit of that, when you're at rest, you'll just burn more fat. So that's what I would look at. There's a friend of mine, Robert Sykes. He just wrote a book on ketogenic bodybuilding, and how he helps a lot of women actually is have them reverse diet. A lot of people in general, but more women than men, I would say, have done chronic dieting, whether it's calorie cutting, this diet, fasting, whatever. But reverse dieting can actually help you increase your metabolic rate and sort of overcome some of the adaptations that happen as a side effect of continuously dieting. So let's just say you and I both go on a diet, we lose 10 pounds. Our resting metabolic rate has decreased. So we're going to have to continue to under-consume food to just maintain that same sort of metabolic rate. And so you imagine doing this for 10, 15 years, off and on, off and on. Some people are still gaining weight if they're eating like 900 calories a day. So you're like, well, how do you keep cutting calories from that standpoint? So reverse dieting or taking the weekends off and not being afraid of, having, say, 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass, and trying to, actually start to eat food again. I think that is problematic, is under eating and over exercise.
Well, what's the rhythm of the reverse dieting then, being basically that you're in at least a maintenance or a surplus? Is that what you're referring to when you say reverse dieting?
Yeah. So going maybe like a 4-week block of where, you're slowly increasing the calories to a maintenance phase. And that way you're increasing your metabolic rate slowly over time. And this isn't a massive sort of shift, and allowing you to sort of cut back on the cardio, because again, a lot of people are dependent upon cardio so that they don't gain weight. Like, I have to go run an hour a day or whatever, or else I'm going to get fat. Well, it's like, well, what you could actually reverse diet and slowly increase your resting metabolic rate, and while scaling back some of that cardio to get to a maintenance phase.
And replacing it with lifting to increase your lean muscle mass so that you burn more calories at rest.
Exactly. And instead of, heavily relying upon the excessive cardio, then focus on, okay, I need to hit every major muscle group at least 1 day per week, whether that's a 3-day split, a 4-day split, but focusing on taking some of that intensity and volume and transferring that to resistance training can be helpful. And
what about, because like a whole month split, I'm thinking to myself, okay, if I was going to do that, where I actually don't do cardio, I just walk. I don't know if that counts as cardio, but I walk. I don't really run, other than after Boston last year, I was like, bye running. And I always enjoyed running. But so, I'm trying to think of a month that I would want to essentially gain weight, and by eating more and, burning less calories and putting on muscle. I can't think of like a whole month where I'm like, oh, I don't have anything to do, where I'm not going to be on camera or not going to be doing something. Is that the only way, or can you do more of a micro sort of split where it's like 5 on, 2 off, like, your weekends are more calorically dense, and then during the week, is that an option to be able to keep your metabolism up?
Totally an option. Yeah. People, there's many studies on this. They call it like a 5-2 sort of diet plan where, really clean, maybe in a slight deficit Monday through Friday, and Saturday and Sunday, you're having family over, you're going out with your friends. You can be, now it doesn't mean you have candy bars every hour, but it means that you're a little bit loose. It's more, a little bit higher calorie days. And so anyway, the point here is a little bit of undulation or variability. If we're too strict for too long, dieting and cardio and high volume CrossFit or whatever, it's just a recipe to burn yourself out and actually cause loss of muscle mass and slow down your metabolic rate, which ultimately doesn't help you, because, you naturally lose muscle as you age. It's harder to put it on.
Totally. And I'm thinking of just, I just turned 40 and, I've got friends that are that age or older. And, there's some that are like, if I eat more than like once or twice a day, like I just gain weight and I just can't even fathom it. I'm like, I just don't, I just can't do it. I won't do it. I don't believe that's the way my body should work. I believe I should be able to eat 3 to 4 times a day within a sort of 8 to 12 hour window. And I should be fine. Like that should not be too much. And so if that's what someone's doing, because that's all that will work for them, or like even maybe there's just people out there that are just crushing Adderall and, like not eating all day. I don't know. But what are the repercussions of that? And then what's the comeback from that? Because if that's all that they can do, that I don't know if that's really sustainable. So what does that look like to come back from that kind of treatment to your body for an extended period of time?
Yeah, well, again, it's more psychological in the sense that there's resistance to actually start to eat more calories. People think that they're going to gain a lot more weight than they actually do. And so, yeah, you might initially retain some water. The scale might fluctuate, but your body composition, especially if you're exercising, shouldn't change so much. So maybe let's just say, if someone were to track what they were, this is a great way, just like a dietary recall. You mentioned that person who like, oh my gosh, if I eat more than 900 calories, I gain fat. Okay, well, make sure that that's what you're really consuming, 900 calories. Then let's start to crank it up. And maybe you bump it up to 250 or 500 calories a day, Monday through Friday, and just kind of see how that goes while you're still exercising. But, some people might notice, hey, I feel better. I move more, my muscles feel just more energy, more mental clarity. I don't feel that fatigue. And I actually didn't gain the fat that I thought I would. So I think that's really an important, aspect, because here's what happens. Our metabolic rate is it's really influenced by and adapting to how much energy we're consuming. So if we continue to diet down, in fact, there was this Biggest Loser, remember that TV show, Biggest Loser? They did a follow-up study of these people. So they lost a lot of weight very quickly through a combination of high volume exercise and excessive calorie restriction. Well, it turns out that their resting metabolic rate was suppressed for over 7 years, even though a lot of them continued to gain weight after the Biggest Loser. So check it out. Yeah, their RMR's lower, yet they've regained like about 50% of the weight that they lost. So they're, basically they're in the red, which is not good metabolically speaking. Yeah. So the point is, we shouldn't have to rely upon super high volume exercise and excessive calorie restriction. We should be able to, not starve ourselves, focus on resistance training, and get to a place where we're like you, Danica. We're walking. Like, hey, look, we're taking a leisurely walk. We enjoy it. The dogs like it. It's good for the family. What have you?
Yeah. Okay. Before we get into some hit lists at the end, I want to ask about just certain testing that may be recommended for people. Short story, I had my breast implants removed 3 weeks ago. For years, no matter what I did, it didn't change my body at all. I kept gaining weight, all kinds of other side effects. And I remember having a suspicion years ago in like 2018, like 4 years ago, that maybe my hormones are off. So I'm just telling that quick short story to say that what kind of testing should we do? Because there are just things that can hold us back from the goals that we have. And what I found myself in was this impossible paradigm of I'm gaining weight, but if I eat less and work out more, I'm now stressing my body and it's continuing to go into hibernation and not work properly. And nothing is really working. But if I don't do the working out and the eating, and then I just keep gaining, it's just, I found myself in this horrible situation. And so I think that this can happen. It can strike at different ages. I mean, I discovered that thyroid was low, hypoglycemia, all my hormones were low, heavy metal toxicity, so many different things. And so it was an enlightening year. But it explained why someone who's, I'm by no means you, but I wrote a book talking about, how to work out and how it works. And, it worked for me and certain diets and ways to eat. And I couldn't make it happen for myself anymore. And so what would you recommend for people to do test-wise to check their body so that they don't find themselves hitting their head against a wall of a problem that they can't get beyond, because there are mechanisms that do hold us back from these goals?
Totally. It's a phenomenal question. The basic labs that I recommend, and this would pick it up too, potentially with in your situation, the liver enzyme. So let's just back up. So when you go to your doctor and just get a standard test, not to promote my website, but I have a cheat sheet on my website, highintensityhealth.com. If you want to check it out, it's a comprehensive metabolic panel called a Chem24 and CBC. So CBC stands for complete blood count. Very basic stuff, but there's a few tests on there that for whatever reason, some big primary care, Kaisers and this and that, they ignore, but you should make sure to request them. So there's 3 liver tests, the GGT, AST, ALT. Usually for whatever reason, most labs and doctors just run AST, but you need all 3. So in your case, if there is environmental toxins or leakage from breast implants or what have you, occupational exposure to lead or arsenic or whatever, the GGT and ALT, again, these are part of the liver function test enzymes. They start to increase above 30, not in everyone, but in some people. So that could be an indicator of, okay, well, look, I've done the calorie restriction and the exercise. Something's not really working here. Could it be persistent organic pollutants? Could it be the endocrine disrupting chemicals? Could it be fatty liver from hyper palatable junk food? All of that. That's really important. The hemoglobin A1C, glucose, and triglycerides. And I like to help people and train them. Like when you're thinking about lab tests, don't just look at one marker. Look at this in a cluster. So what are the triglycerides? What do those look like? And so for some people in the situation that you mentioned, metabolically inflexible, can't burn the fat, oftentimes the triglycerides start to increase. They're over 100 usually. And that is also linked with an elevation and sort of a constellation that appears to be pre-diabetic. So hemoglobin A1C, glucose, triglycerides tend to pair together. So those are things that I would look at, and also look at insulin to see. So most doctors don't think to run insulin, but it should be run, and it should never be elevated in a fasted state, because insulin shouldn't be elevated when you're fasting. It's a post-meal hormone. So those are just, again, like 5 or 6 things that we mentioned.
Yeah.
Common, you can get them at any commercial lab or major hospital in the US. Most oftentimes they're ignored or not looked at. And then you can go down the chain further and look at other, sort of metabolic tests, LDL, LDH, there's a few things, but, just off the cuff, just think about, without having to get into boutique labs from, say, Genova or Metametrics or these companies. Those are pretty helpful and can give you an indicator about what's going on.
Sure.
And
to go deeper.
Totally.
Right. Because it's like phase 1 is, do these things check out? Now phase 2 is, let's get into the boutique labs and let's go deeper. How often would you recommend that people do that? And what age should they start at?
I think in people's 30s, so that they have a good baseline.
Yeah. Got to know what good is.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I was just fortunate enough that I started when I was in my 20s because I had mentors that told me to do this. But then you can sort of see changes, right? Like if you see, for example, you have your albumin, if that suddenly changed, that's sort of a red flag that there could be some sort of tumor processes going on, or maybe a pre-cancer situation. So anyway, it's good to have these things. You don't need to, some people test every month, way too much. I mean, unless you're actively, figuring out some complex, you just had a heart attack, for example. But I think once a year, every 18 months, it's a good idea.
Okay. That's good. All right. What are some top supplements? First off, maybe I'll ask, do you think that it's possible that we can get everything that we need from our diet, or are we in a state now where, based on soils, food manufacturing and sourcing, that we actually can't achieve the level of vitamins and nutrients that we need for ultimate health? Can we get it through food, and then if not, then what supplements are the most important? And maybe just the most important supplements anyway, because you probably have to be pretty determined to get all your nutrients in if you wanted to do it through food.
Yeah. I think there's probably like 2% of the population who have like a homestead with cows and chickens and grass fed.
I'm so jealous.
Yeah, biodynamic farming. Like if that's you, then probably you don't need to spend any money on supplements. But most people can benefit from taking vitamin D, especially, believe it or not, even in Arizona. There was one study in Tucson, Arizona. It's really sunny, as many people know, in Tucson. And this was college kids, and this was like from 2007, were surveyed and analyzed and look at their labs. They had insufficient vitamin D because we're taught now that the sun is bad, that's going to cause skin cancer, that it's really, you got to cover up. And so people are outside, but they're covering up their skin and they're wearing sunscreen. So most people deficient in vitamin D. An easy one that's affordable is iodine. Iodine is very important. If you don't have a water filter or drink filtered water, you're getting probably chlorine and fluoride in your water, both of which antagonize iodine. As you know, iodine, very important for the thyroid, but women concentrate iodine in their breast tissue and in the uterus. So there's really good data showing it's helpful. For new moms, they must consider this because iodine deficiency is linked with suboptimal IQ in developing babies. So iodine, and it's so cheap. I don't even know why.
Drops?
Little drops. Yeah. It's on Amazon. You can find it anywhere.
Recommended
Potassium.
dose is?
So it's in usually micrograms. So one drop would be 150 micrograms. I want to say the RDA is maybe 400 micrograms, which is far too low. Most people that in Japan and other parts of the world that eat seafood would get like 2 to 3 to up to 12 milligrams. So you can be pretty liberal with the dosaging. Yeah. So I in our household, we have some droppers, we'll take like a milligram, 1 to 2 milligrams every day. So, but yeah, iodine's a big one. Let's see what else. I'm a huge fan of magnesium for obvious reasons. It's a participant in over 350 enzymatic reactions in the body. So magnesium is really helpful. You want to look for glycinate or malate or threonate. Those are the forms that are going to be best absorbed. Again, these are all affordable. Most people can afford everything that we talked about. Now, for women that have issues with PCOS or sleep, stress issues, L-theanine and inositol can be helpful before bed in the evening. So those are things to consider, more specialty sort of micronutrients, but not egregious or not super outrageous in terms of price. Gosh, what else? I mean, I'm biased. I created an electrolyte that's really, really cool. We have real salt and all these things. So electrolyte can be helpful. And also, I should say, creatine for women, very helpful. In fact, most of the research has been on creatine for men, but women don't store as much creatine as men. It can really help them from the cognition standpoint.
Just asking my doctor about this. I was like, should I take creatine? And I think the idea from a female perspective, if I'm going to speak for the collective, is that you're going to have water retention. You're going to it's going to bloat you. But that's not true.
So yeah, here's the thing, Danica, all the creatine stuff, the perception of bloating and water retention, all that was from, bad actors in the late 90s that sold creatine with 4 parts dextrose to 1 part creatine. So let's say you take 5 grams of creatine, you would be taking 20 plus grams, sometimes 40 grams of pure sugar. So then people would retain water. They'd have kidney issues. Like, whoa, man, why is this creatine? No, it wasn't the creatine. It was the refined sugar that was paired with it because there was this perception that you had to have sugar in order to make creatine more effective. But new research actually shows that electrolytes like salt, calcium, potassium, magnesium help make creatine function better and help with, because creatine is also involved in osmolysis and functioning of hydration. But it really functions when you're exercising. It helps the cell with energy production. So that's how it works. It's not anabolic. People think, creatine, I'm going to get facial hair if I'm a woman. No, it does not impact testosterone or any of the androgens. It's solely functioning at the cellular level at hydration and also helping with exercise energy production. So yeah, that's a big one, especially for women who have been vegan or vegetarian or don't eat red meat. They stand to benefit the most from supplementing with creatine.
Yeah. And you take that right before you work out? Is that a pre-workout or is it a morning thing?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you remember, but researchers have looked at pre-workout and intra-workout, like during the workout, you could just sip on it.
I wasn't going to ask this. I was going to try and wrap it up, but I feel like you mentioned it. And it was something I was thinking about today. Vegans and vegetarians. Is it possible to sustain that and be healthy and get everything that you need with that diet? Because I feel like that's one of those that, man, people might try it for a little bit. They might feel okay for a second, but I mean, I don't think there's anyone I've ever met that hasn't said, yeah, I was the worst. I was the least healthy I'd ever been, things like that. Is this just like, cause it's a thing, like vegan restaurants and, I don't know, call the shows that come out propaganda. I don't know. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but it's very popular.
It is. Yeah. I mean, everywhere you go, it's plant-based.
I tried.
Powered by plants. Yeah.
Oh man, I tried. I was like, I mean, and then I kind of migrated towards fish, and now I eat it all because I truly feel the best with high fat animal meat.
Yeah, me as well. And so I've dabbled and experimented with all this. We have a lot of like 400 square feet of gardening space. And so for the month of July and August, every year we try to eat as many vegetables as we can. And I was just honest with myself. I'm like, you know what? I have a lot of gastrointestinal distress. I feel bloated. Yeah. I feel like I just look sort of emaciated in the face. I'm not as strong. Yeah. So I'm like, you know what? And this is just my N of one. I'm sure there are some people who do well on it. But what I found, generally speaking, is most people gravitate after they've been vegan or vegetarian to having more fish and having red meat because they're either anemic, they're deficient, in iron, and as a consequence, they're anemic, or they have other B vitamin insufficiencies because of, say, the cofactors, like we talked about creatine. You're not going to find creatine in plants. You're not going to find other carnonutrients like carnosine, like taurine. Taurine is highly concentrated in the heart. It does a lot of great things. It's a natural electrolyte as well. You're not going to find much zinc in plants. You're not going to find thiamine or B12. So choline. There are so many micronutrients that you're not going to find in plants. So I think people, again, we need to be really honest about why are we being plant-based? Because again, we're hearing messaging from the powers that be that eating meat's not sustainable. Eating meat rots your colon. Eating meat creates heart disease. I mean, there's all these things. You're destroying the planet if you consume animal products. But there's a big difference in the quality and the amount of environmental destruction of, say, conventionally agricultural raised, industrial agriculture pork versus, say, grass-fed, free-range pasture beef, right? So total different where you have an animal living in its native environment, eating food that it should be eating, and then regenerating the agriculture versus something that's on a commercial feedlot that's creating tons of sewage and waste and antibiotics, right? So we need to sort of disentangle and be a little bit more nuanced about the types of foods that we're eating and so on. And likewise, when it comes to a plant-based diet, a lot of people have plant-based junk food, right? It's like, oh, it's plant-based. It's just soy protein, canola oil, and sugar. Yeah, that's derived from plants, but that is not nourishing your body. Mm-hmm. That is creating inflammation. You can look at any of the studies that have been done looking at creating metabolic endotoxemia and gut dysbiosis and altering the gut biome, right? You can have vegan junk food and it's going to do that. So again, most people, when they go plant-based, they're not eating organic vegetables. It's plant-based junk food. Mm-hmm. So not good. But to answer your question specifically, could you do it? If you were on a Hawaiian island growing your own stuff, right? You had all sorts of mangoes, papayas, avocados, coconuts, and maybe you had some fish periodically, you could probably pull it off. But most people are not doing that. So I think we just need to be a little bit honest with ourselves. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having red meat and fish, supplementing a plant-based diet with that periodically because you're getting nutrients that you wouldn't be getting from plants.
Yeah. All right. There's so many other questions, but I know we probably need to wrap it up. So, okay. Based on, I was asking Jen, my producer, just from like, what's a good question? And so I think this is a question that honestly applies to like everybody, but maybe especially girls. Okay. So if you had sort of like a very short amount of time and something that you were preparing for, and honestly, maybe this fits in really well with kind of cycling and having those ebbs and flows of diet of caloric restriction, but then somewhat of a surplus or maintenance calorie amount. So what can you do if you have just a couple of weeks before an event or a trip? What can you do to lean out before that?
I would recommend either alternate day fasting or alternate day OMAD, which is 1 meal a day.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be an easy way. And again, I like the alternating because you're not chronically suppressing. Because when we chronically cut calories, even for 3 weeks, we get this metabolic adaptation, slowing of the metabolic rate. So you have a wedding coming up. You're like, okay, what do I do? You could eat your normal diet Monday. Tuesday, you're having just 1 meal. Let's say it's lunch. And maybe it's less overall calories. Maybe you cut your calories by 500 or 750, right? Then you could eat normal on Wednesday, back to the 1 meal a day or really low calorie on Thursday, and so on. So that's what I would suggest. But on those days where you're eating normally, I would really try to exercise and focus on weightlifting, not cardio. Oh. So trying to hit those muscles, because that's actually going to help prevent the sort of metabolic adaptation, slowing of the metabolic rate, and it will help you burn fat and look more fit. I mean, here's the thing. Even if you look at natural bodybuilders who go, they're skinny, they have no muscle because they diet down. You don't have to lose as much fat to look good if you have muscle underneath. And so that's the thing that I would focus on. Of course, you could bake in cardio into that, but I would do more intervals. So instead of hopping on the elliptical, I would say hit the ski erg, hit the concept row, focus on power, like, try to row 200 meters in under a minute or something, like really try to go intense for 45 seconds or 60 seconds and then take a break and come back to it. That's what I would focus on. But I do like the alternate day. Like, I'll periodically do that if I'm going to go on to Hawaii. We went to Hawaii in March. I was like, okay. So every other day I was doing a really low calorie day, but it wasn't consistently low. And so I never got that permanent sort of suppression in my metabolic rate.
Got it. What about the macro balance of it? Is there anything you do with that?
Yeah. I mean, I would cut out all the refined stuff or only have that on 1 day a week. So no ice cream, no cookies, no bread, no pasta. And I would have my carbs early in the day. So before noon.
Early. Okay. All right.
So you could have it, say, before you train. So that could be either right before, within a few hours of exercise or after. And then just keep it protein and fat. And that, for most people, you're going to see the biggest thing, how you know if you're making progress, is how do your pants feel? That's the first thing that should change, is around the waistline. Yeah. And so that should start to change. And what's cool about what we just talked about is you could probably sustain that too if you wanted to, as a strategy long term, and not have a lot of weight regain. Whereas what people would normally do is say, oh my gosh, I got this wedding coming up. I'm going to have iceberg lettuce and celery and just do a bunch of cardio
every day.
Then you're going to gain a bunch of weight once that ends, and that's not good.
Amazing. Thank you so much. You're just such a wealth of information. We're going to have to do this again, because I think I probably have 15 more questions.
Heck yeah. Anytime. Happy to do so.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.